know, where to find salvation, Lord willing, hopefully. But what about political salvation? That seems to be the question on our mind these days. What do we do with the two people running for president? And Donald Trump seems to really have us in a difficult position. Normally Christians, I think, statistics show anyway, especially Christians who, go to church weekly and consider Christian theology seriously. Generally Christians tend to vote for the more conservative candidate because they line up with their worldview, their biblical worldview, especially on social issues like abortion and same-sex marriage and all the other issues like that. Okay. But this year, boy, we have a real conundrum. And what do we do with Donald Trump? I mean, Hillary Clinton, she's off the table. But what do we do with Donald Trump? And that's what we're going to be looking at today, the Christian conundrum with what to do in this year. And Wayne Grudem, very well-known evangelical ethicist and professor, I guess. Not someone I have to admit I haven't read a lot of, but boy, he really kind of dropped a bomb about a couple of weeks ago, saying that voting for Donald Trump is a morally good choice, and those are some pretty strong words. So I'm going to be talking about that today with a guest, but I just first want to thank you for listening to the Sin Boldly radio program here at KPFT. KPFT is listener-supported radio. We're in Houston, and if you listen, you know that KPFT has some of the best music in Houston. I think the best music in all of Houston radio. And the most interesting talk, you never know what you're going to get from day to day. And we're on the HD3 channel, and so glad to be here. I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor over at First Evangelical Lutheran Church, and this is an opportunity for us to have a weekly dialogue about what's going on, but also evergreen material and thinking about bigger picture. So it's not just about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. That won't matter in 4 years. 4 years from now, we're still going to be asking these same questions about how do we take a biblical worldview into the ballot box? How do we evaluate a candidate as Christians? So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. If you want to email me about past shows, future shows, or this show, emc2@felchouston.org. That's the website for the church. emc2@felchouston.org. And without any further delay, I'm joined by Dr. Kevin Baird. Pastor Baird, as well, was saved at the age of 18. A few months later, he received the call of God to the ministry. He holds a bachelor's degree in religion and philosophy from Mid-America Nazarene University, a master's of divinity in historical theology from Nazarene Theological Seminary, and a doctorate of ministry in church history from Evangel Theological Seminary. He's been a conference speaker, college professor, and international prophetic voice to this generation. And he, along with his wife Tricia, founded Legacy Church in 2002, an interdenominational, spirit-empowered local church in the Charleston, South Carolina area. Dr. Baird, Pastor Baird, are you with us?
I am with you, Evan. It's good to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Good deal. Well, really glad you could come on. Like I said, Wayne Grudem, very well-known figure, although I have to say, I've not read a lot of his stuff, but I know he's a very influential guy, has been very influential in your own ministry. He wrote, you can find it at Town Hall, so widely read website, townhall.com, August 9th, 2016, why voting for, that can't be right. I must have printed it off on August 9th, but he wrote it, he wrote it July 28th, I'm sorry. Why voting for Donald Trump is a morally good choice. And this is a guy who teaches ethics. So, he knows generally of what he speaks. But Pastor Baird, I ran across your response to that. You have a blog, and it made the rounds on Facebook, as I'm sure you're aware, because when I went to print off your article, it was 112 pages from all the comments. So it's and other folks have written responses. Houston Baptist University, John Mark Reynolds wrote a response. I've read other responses at a variety of websites to Wayne Grudem. I think he's kind of taken a shellacking, but I really appreciated the way that you responded in terms of bigger picture. We're not going to get into all the nitty-gritty of the character of Donald Trump and the history of Donald Trump, but rather it's about biblical worldview, and I think a consistent worldview. So what I want to do is just kind of just go through Dr. Grudem's article, but I really want to hear kind of your response and your commentary. So let me just begin by just kind of getting us into this here, reading a little bit of the introduction of Dr. Grudem's article, and we can kind of look at it. But it begins, some of my Christian friends tell me that they can't in good conscience vote for Donald Trump because when faced with a choice between the lesser of two evils, the morally right thing is to choose neither one. They recommend voting for a third party or writing candidate. As a professor who has taught Christian ethics for 39 years, I think their analysis is incorrect. Now that Trump has won the GOP nomination, I think voting for Trump is a morally good choice. Let me just stop there. Couple of questions for you, Dr. Baird. One would be, he says now that Trump has won the GOP nomination, and to me that's kind of the crux of everything we're going to talk about, which is what's the difference between Trump as a primary candidate and Trump as a GOP nominated candidate? That's one question. And another question is, you're someone who's thought a lot about biblical worldview and applying that biblical worldview. What's the difference between a Christian who, say, ends up voting for Trump and someone who says, that it's the morally good thing to do? So I don't know if you want to, those are big questions, but I don't know if you want to start to unpack that or.
Well, even in his opening statement, there are so many different cans that get opened. It's hard to know where to first wrap your arm around it. Let me first say that Dr. Grudem states in his article that he was against the Trump candidacy in the primary selection. And again, while I didn't hear every speech he made or every point that he made, I know Dr. Grudem through his writings well enough to know that he has or had a fairly consistent and precise worldview, biblical worldview, which he was applying that template to Donald Trump, which we can talk more about here in a moment. The problem is that the ejection of that advocacy against his being the GOP nomination to now suddenly he's the best option we have is difficult for me, both on a political basis as well as a more important biblical basis. The sheer political basis is we have other options, we have other choices, we can do other things besides Mr. Trump. But the biblical basis is how can something that was wrong at one point now become right in another point? And the word we use for that is called situational ethics. And situational ethics is not a biblical, philosophical, applicable concept that works well, but it seems to be used within the context of how we vote and how we choose our leaders, and that is where we have our problem.
Right. Yeah, so I thought it was strange that he says, now that Trump has won the GOP nomination, it's like, well, if he wasn't fit to win the primary, what makes him fit to win the nation? But the inevitable argument is going to be, and it's one that I've heard from, members of my own family, and, is, well, yeah, but what's the alternative? The third-party candidate, whoever they are this year, has not made enough traction to be palatable. It just doesn't happen that third parties, they always just end up taking votes away, generally speaking, from the conservative candidate. We don't want another Ross Perot situation where we end up with Bill Clinton. So, I don't think a lot of Republicans want to go there. So and then Hillary, of course, is just a non-starter, gosh, we're kind of taking that for granted. But what would you say on a biblical worldview would make Hillary Clinton a non-palatable candidate for a Christian? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about Donald Trump.
Well, I think most Christians at large, and this debate I think you're talking about is being housed within evangelical Christianity. So we're going to push the secularism off to the side for the sake of this debate. But the question is she's a non-starter just because of her goals, and most of us would agree on that. In fact, those of my friends, Christian friends who are supporting Trump, we have absolutely zero difference when it comes to the general goals that we would like to see in our culture. So it's pretty easy to agree on the fact that Hillary Clinton is not going to implement any of our concerns or goals with regards to our value system, our moral system, etc. So to me, that's fairly easy. The difficult part comes is when we ask the question, because now everyone says, well, then all we're left with is, and is that a true statement? Is that really all we're left with is Donald Trump? Or is that even the right question to begin with? I believe the better question to begin with is, does God set a pattern for selecting leaders that as Christians we need to adhere to and not enter into false choices or paradigms that are simply presented to us by the culture?
Right.
Which comes to, if, let's say I have an election between, I like how Pastor Kerry Gordon puts it, he says, if I have an election between Adolf Hitler and Stalin, am I expected to choose between the two?
Yeah.
And the answer is, if both are morally corrupt, then perhaps there's no choice to be made at all. And if there are valid other choices, then perhaps as Christians we need to pursue that, believing that in our obedience, perhaps God will do something. And that's what it's all going to boil down to. It's going to boil down to whether or not we believe that somehow we're helping sort of whatever God's plan is out in this two-party system, or whether we obey a particular template and then rest and trust that whatever his purposes are will come to pass. That
right.
sort of, to me, tees up the argument in a better fashion.
Right. I like how you put it in your article, your response. The question that is never answered is, are we required to empower those people to leadership, that is, unqualified people? And you say, I can accept God's providence in allowing an Ahab or Jezebel to rule, but am I expected to empower either one to that position? And one thing that we don't see in the Bible is Paul casting a vote for, who Caesar is. You don't see a lot of Christians with a whole lot of say in the political impact. But you quote, for example, Exodus 18:21, and how important would you say that verse is in terms of shedding wisdom on how we are to cast our own votes? Because again, the New Testament Christians really aren't in a position to cast votes, but you do have in Exodus 18 here, people have an opportunity to raise up leaders.
Right, and there are several things though that in our current culture that aren't directly able to be pulled out of the Scripture. They weren't driving cars. They didn't have speed limits. I mean, I could go down the list of 1,000 things in that area that they didn't have that we have to work through today. So the question is not, can I find an exact representation? The question is, do we have precepts by which we can find direct application? And the answer to that is yes. And one of those, as you mentioned, is Exodus 18:21, when Jethro came up to Moses because of the weight of carrying really the nation of Israel on his shoulders, 5 million plus people, and having to make decisions, and said, this isn't good. There needs to be a divesting of this leadership. And so he qualifies them in that particular chapter by explaining 3 or 4 qualities, just really general qualities in that chapter. Mm-hmm. And if they fulfilled those general qualities, then they were qualified by which to exercise leadership in that nation. And I believe that that's a valid hermeneutical application to what we're facing today, that if we don't have biblically qualified, again, not perfect candidates, no one's expecting perfection, we'll never find it.
Yeah.
But we can find qualified candidates that we can endorse or empower through our vote and say yes to their leadership.
Yeah. Let me read that. I wrote it down here. I actually hand wrote out a Bible verse. It's been a long time since I did that, since the days of copy and paste. But moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy, and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. So, but there the qualities would be men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe. And I'm sure you've seen the interview that I think it was the pollster Frank Luntz did with Donald Trump, where he asked him if he's ever asked God for forgiveness, I think, or if he ever repented. I think he said, have you ever asked God for forgiveness? And Trump hems and haws and comes back later and says no, that he couldn't think of a time when he ever asked for forgiveness. So it's, I mean, if you're right, and Exodus 18:21 would help us to look for people who are qualified for something as important as the presidency of the United States, it's hard to say that he's a man who fears God if he first of all, he has no church membership, and he doesn't seem to be an active Christian, but how could you never need to ask God for forgiveness? That strikes me as psychopathic, frankly. I mean,
it is odd, and of course the fruit of his life tends to indicate that there is no fear of God in that regard. I mean, we don't have to list. I mean, Grudem, if people wanted to go ahead and read Grudem's article about how voting for Trump is morally right, they will actually find a lengthy list of character defects, which Grudem, to his credit, honestly put out there in his article, which is oxymoronic that after you put that out, he says, and yet it's morally right to empower him
right.
To leadership. So it's evident at several levels, but you're right. It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I'll give Trump this. He's honest when he admits infidelity, to his. So I don't know if that counts as honesty or not. But the list here is Grudem says Trump is egotistical, bombastic, and brash. He lacks nuance. I think that's a polite way of saying that he is undisciplined in his speech, which I think represents an undisciplined mind. But he blurts out mistaken ideas like bombing the families of terrorists. He insults people. He's vindictive. And he claims, like I said, he's been married 3 times and claims to have been unfaithful in his marriages. So like I said, I appreciate Donald Trump's honesty about his infidelity. How's that for some irony? But then he says, but these are not disqualifying flaws. And even if one were tempted to sort of overlook some of that, and I have to say I made my decision regarding Trump watching the primary debates and just watching the way he treated people, calling people liars again and again. And to me, to call someone a liar is really an awful thing to do. If it is not true, and to be unable to back it up or to persist in it, even if a mistake was made and apologized for, to me that is just to call someone a liar is really to defame a person, and I just don't know how you do that without being totally lacking empathy for another person. It just anyway, that's kind of when I made my mind about the guy, but. But then, like this week, he makes the comment about the Second Amendment people and Hillary Clinton, and, read that however you want, but it's a really dumb thing to say. So, I don't know,
Well, and Exodus 18:21 is a great, quick synopsis of a biblical template that we'll put out there in order to qualify someone for leadership. The truth of the matter is there are 4 areas of governing, if you'll let me go through this super fast.
Sure.
There's self-government, which is really self-restraint, the ability to govern oneself. There's self-government. There's marriage and family government, the ability to run your household, your marriage, your family. There is the third area, which is church government, or your ability to connect and participate within the life of the body of Christ. And then fourthly, there's civil government. Well, if we go down through each one of those 4, you'll find that he's not been that successful at any of those 4 areas of biblical government. Now, I didn't make this up myself. This is what the Bible teaches by ways of how we govern. Is he self-restrained? Is he self-controlled? Has he governed his appetites and his lusts and his hungers? And has he been successful at that through his life? Mm-hmm. Well, I would say no. Let's talk about marriage and family. People point to his children, and his children certainly are attractive children. They're articulate children. They're affluent children. We don't know much beyond that. Don't know even how much mom might have had their moms involved in their life. But the fact of the matter is he has not managed his marriages well at all. So could we say he's been successful at that level? The answer is no. Church government, has he been connected to a body? Has he been under a pastor? Has he received any discipleship? Is there just basic biblical knowledge? 2 Corinthians, I would suggest that is not a passing grade in that arena. And then finally, civic government, he fully admits that because he exploited the system, he's the best one to correct the system.
Yeah.
So I maintain that in those 4, that's another biblical template I'll put out there, that of those 4 categories, he objectively fails in these areas. And my concern is that evangelical Christians are basing their vote on the hopes of his promises rather than the fruit of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And And I'm simply saying that the only way I can base my confidence in his promises is based upon how he's executed these things in his life.
Yeah.
And I have zero confidence that he will be able to provide fulfillment on any of the promises that he has made.
Yeah, it's funny how, this definition of insanity, I don't know if it comes from like the 12 steps or what, but, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. If we take that as a bit of worldly wisdom that we can take to the bank, then, shouldn't we look at Donald Trump in the same way and basically say, why he's been living one way his entire life? Why would we expect him to change now? I mean, it was
again.
Yeah.
The Scripture says, "Can a leopard change its spots?"
Yeah.
Now, the point being is, sure, we all believe in redemption. I believe in redemption. I believe second, third, fourth, 10 chances. I mean, so, and Donald can have those too. But the issue is that even if it is true that he has recently rededicated his life or made a commitment to Christ or whatever. And I'm not here to even judge that, but I am here to say, how would we handle anyone else in that situation? We would disciple them. We would look at them and say, if you need to be faithful. I'll put it in the positive. You need to be faithful in lesser things before you're handed greater things. Again, I'm just quoting Scripture.
Right.
Then you provide a track record. Paul, when he was saved, spent years in the house of Ananias before he was released as an apostle in the church.
Right.
David spent years in the cave of Adullam before he was released to rule in Jerusalem. He had to rule in Hebron even before Jerusalem. So I can go through the Scriptures with these flawed individuals whom God used greatly and make the case that they weren't handed nations in this flawed condition. Now, they may have screwed up while they were leaders, but the fact of the matter is there is a track record that they had before they were handed the keys to a nation, and Donald Trump simply does not have that track record.
Right. Yeah. Even Paul in 1 Timothy, when he's talking about the qualifications of an elder, he says it can't be a new convert because they'll be puffed up with conceit. So Paul doesn't even want a new convert, leading a church, much less a new convert, if Trump is indeed a new convert, as I think James Dobson sort of implied, leading an entire nation. So, he just doesn't seem to me to be someone who has a disciplined way of thinking. It's just basically, I've heard other people say things like, he doesn't read. Reading is not for everybody. Some people just listen to podcasts. That's cool. But, I don't know, just the discipline of the mind and the way of thinking through complex problems and, issues of national security. I mean, I have to say, Hillary Clinton is, pretty, I have to be careful about what I can say on the radio, but I'll just say that, she's a very flawed candidate as well, but, and she might be she might be taking money from all the wrong people, but she doesn't strike me as an undisciplined person. In fact, she strikes me as diabolically disciplined. But what about the Supreme Court, though? Because one of the things that Grudem talks about, really, I mean, I think it's almost a singular justification for Trump, is that, look, what do we look at what could happen if Clinton gets in? We're talking about 3 or 4 judges, up for retirement and replacing them with real liberals, and Trump has put out a list of 12 or 20 judges that, from everything I hear, are just rock solid. And, doesn't that make you afraid? I mean, of what could happen? Because we ideally we would have security, Supreme Court judges and lower who would maybe be able to repeal Roe v. Wade in some way, and maybe even reverse Obergefell in some way, or something like that. Wouldn't that be worth it? Wouldn't Trump presidency be worth it if we could get a hold of this judiciary?
Well, there's a couple ways to answer the question in my mind. Again, let's go. I'll deal with first a rational, and then we'll go back to a biblical. Mm-hmm. First, my concern would be my confidence levels aren't high because of the 7 last appointed Supreme Court justices by Republican presidents. 4 of them have thrown our concerns under the bus. Mm-hmm. John Roberts, being one of the most early ones, affirmed the Obamacare the Obamacare implementation, where it originally was forcing people to supply abortifacients and abortion services to Christian business people. And so I'm simply saying that at first, just to simply use that as the reasoning, the GOP has not been stellar in just statistical fact and appointments with regards to Supreme Court justices. But let's go back to the whole premise. And you had asked, and it's a perfectly set up question, because this is what people say: don't you fear what might happen? Well, yeah. Do I not want Hillary to rule? Sure, I understand her worldview. I know what she wants to do. I get it. But the question is not, do I fear Hillary? The question is, do I fear God? And am I allowed to disobey God in what is a clearly outlined precept in order to justify what I believe, even in my best intentions, to be a justifiable reason? It's almost like I want to help God out here.
Right.
Who are we to say we know the will of God? Who are we to say we know who's to be elected? Who are we to say this has to be the will of God? Because God, can only work within a two-party system. So my problem is that God's Word says one thing. I am asked now to swim upstream with my vote in order to obey Him. Now, that kind of sounds like a biblical template on a number of levels. God's people are asked to do unusual things out of obedience, even though the circumstance seems to warrant something different. That's why we can't fall into pragmatism over precept, because pragmatism can say all kinds of things. Well, I just won't tithe anymore because I need to pay my bills. God certainly would understand that. Mm-hmm. Are you following my logic?
I'm right there with you. I'm just. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, these are the questions that people throw out to me all the time, though. It's like, well, look, the alternative is so bad, the court's in play, but yeah, I think your point is we don't know history, or we don't know the future. We don't know.
But I'm not, and we're not talking. Well, I'm not talking to the world. Now, I realize you probably have listeners from every different background. You want to respect them, all sorts of worldviews. Hey, we can all respect and listen to each other. But here's the deal: I'm talking to those who are Christians, who say they have an objective moral authority upon which they base the living out of their faith, which we call the Scriptures or the Bible. Mm-hmm. And the question to us is, can we violate that in order to pragmatically bring to pass something we may think is better or help God out?
Yeah.
And I'm just saying that is situational ethics.
Right.
That is relativism. That is what an old cult used to do when it used to send its girls out to sleep with guys in order to solicit them to make a decision for the Lord.
Right.
I mean, how pragmatic do you want to get?
Right.
So,
right.
I know, I'm probably, enlarging that or exaggerating it for the sake of point, but it is the point.
Right. Well, I think too. And I might be suspect to pragmatism here, but one thing that I've thought is, and again, this may be more political than biblical, but, why would we assume that Hillary becoming president would necessarily be worse? I mean, maybe the conservative forces would retain the levers in Congress and would be able to restrict a lot of what she would want to do or something. I mean, it just seems like, oh God, what's going to happen to our nation if Hillary is elected? Everybody's powerless in this situation. You have no sovereignty. We can't do anything. And maybe God's up there saying, no, the best thing that could ever happen to you in this situation is that Hillary is elected. It just seems like we don't know, and basically for us to then sell our soul to defend a guy who is indefensible from a biblical point of view, to me, it calls our integrity into question. And I think we have to take the long view. We have to look at this, what kind of a nation do we want? What kind of a society do we want? What kind of a culture do we want? What kind of influence do we want the church to have in this country right now? And are we sacrificing our integrity with people that we might want to work with and evangelize to and can bring to our worldview if we support a guy who doesn't even agree with us?
Exactly, Evan. You're hitting a nail on the head at this point, because I contend that for Christian leaders to say things like Grudem. I'm sorry, the man has written some great stuff. I've used his stuff. He's been right on so many issues, but on this one, to suddenly say this is morally right, to use that phrase, it's morally right to vote for Donald Trump, I think you've just undermined your ability to speak to character ever again in the political arena. It doesn't matter anymore. If we, as the church, will run and empower those kinds of leaders with our votes, then we just need to be quiet then about any type of moral standard that we expect from our leadership, because we've forfeited it.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing when people say, well, if Hillary wants to come after Trump for his infidelity, well, Trump's going to hit right back with bills. And I'm thinking, wow, that's where we're at as conservatives who have an interest in politics. It's who has the most affairs, and our guy has less than yours. I mean, it just seems like we're just settling to the nth degree. But let me ask this. I mean, because Grudem is saying, and I'm not an ethicist. I never even took Philosophy 101. So, I've never studied ethics in depth, or, I'd like to think I know it's generally right and wrong, but he's saying it's morally right to vote for Trump. I think the adverse of that, or the opposite of that, would then really have to be true, which is it's morally wrong not to vote for Trump because you're empowering this duplicitous, evil woman. Do you think that if a Christian votes for Trump, that they are doing something wrong? Or do you respect their decision to make lemonade out of lemons? Or do you think, in fact, they're abandoning their worldview?
Yeah. Yes, this is the thorny one. And the reason it is because this one's getting shot both directions. I've been called, a legalist, pharisaical. I live in this ivory tower of moral idealism, and I don't know the realities of, the real world. And, I've been put down pretty quick with regards to my distancing from Trump. And I want to have a civil discussion. In other words, I want to be respectful. I know I'm not answering your question directly, but if I just blurt it out, it's going to seem abrupt.
Yeah.
But here's what I feel like my job as a pastor and a shepherd is to do. I am to teach the people and lead them through the Scriptures to what God asks of us as people who live in this world and who believe, and maybe we can get to this here in a minute, out of Colossians 1, that recognizes that God is over all things. There's nothing we do, whatever we do, Paul said in Colossians, we do to the glory of God. So when I cast a vote, I do it to honor and to glorify God. And I've got to think through whether empowering someone that as egregiously flawed as either of these candidates, am I glorifying God, or is there another direction I can go, still participating in the system, and walk away and keep my integrity? And I believe the answer is yes.
Right.
So do I think yes, I believe there are well-intentioned Christian people who I will say are my brothers and sisters, who are well-intended in as much as we have the same goals for what we want for our nation. But I believe that it's not just the goals God determines, but it's the process He determines as well. And that's the part we've got to get a hold of.
Yep. Let me ask this. We've talked about a little bit, what would make someone like Donald Trump unqualified, and I think I think you mentioned it earlier, but one of the most telling things and just mind-boggling things that I heard during the debates is that, why did you give money to the Clinton Foundation? Why did you give money to this liberal Democrat candidate? Well, I was buying them off. He's basically admitting to illegal, immoral behavior. In Exodus 18:21, doesn't it say someone who hates the bribe? Well, this is basically a guy who admitted to paying them, maybe not receiving them, but it's not hard to imagine someone receiving them if they openly pay them and admit to them, which is kind of mind-boggling. But from what I understand, one of his casinos has a strip club in it. That's got to be a first. Someone running for president who owns a strip club and casinos. We just overlook casinos now like it's nothing. I still live in a state that doesn't have them. but that no one thinks a thing anymore of any moral problem with gambling. I don't know. I mean, but 4 years ago we had someone who was a Mormon, and I think a lot of evangelicals. It's hard to say, but I think Romney got 4 million less votes than McCain, and I think in a lot of ways Romney was a better candidate, just pragmatically speaking. But why is it that we could vote for a Mormon? Because he has fundamentally different views from us, but why can't we vote for Trump? I mean, is it and how morally depraved does a person have to be before we go, okay, that's the limit. That's the he crossed a line. He's too morally depraved. I can't vote for him.
Well, and again, since every American has a vote, I guess every American will get to draw their line.
Yeah.
I think Romney, to compare Romney with Trump is not exactly a great or fair discussion. Yeah. Romney had stellar character. Despite the fact I am diametrically opposed to his theology, he had some character. Now, he had some political positions that he flip-flopped on and some other things. And again, many people held their nose and pushed the button and hoped for the best. And maybe I suspect there were Christians that had difficulty, him being a Mormon. But to go back and try to work through and deal with apples and apples, for me, it's just not where I'm at. I'm at the place now where I think we have ample evidence that always choosing the lesser of two evils is never going to pull the pendulum back to the plumb line. We are always... can we really say that we're surprised we are where we are?
Right.
And will we be surprised next time if we empower all of this, continue to empower it, we're going to get the same thing next time.
Right.
And so at what point do we say, and I've asked my colleagues this, I said, hey, where's your line then? If you're going to put Trump in, then do you have a line? Is there a sin out there anywhere that in your mind is so egregious that that's the line and you're not going to do this? And a lot of them will say abortion, and that seems to be the line. But it would be interesting to see that if you had a Democrat and a Republican and both were pro-choice, how would you determine that?
Right.
Then one is less pro-choice than the other one, and so therefore it more validates kind of the direction I'm going.
Right.
So
right.
I can push that.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Where does this end? And it's because we're in situationalism. We're choosing in a false paradigm.
Right.
And until Christians eject from that, and would there be pain? Well, probably. But we don't know. We don't know if God might not send revival if we all just did what's right. I don't know. But that's the point. It's not having to know. It's just having to obey. We walk by faith, not by sight.
Right.
So our command is you obey me, and then you leave the results in my hands. And if we cannot get to that simplicity again, we will forever convolute this country right into the ash heap of history.
Right, and it really won't matter anyway. I mean, either one of these people, I think, at this point is capable of doing great damage, but God is sovereign, and God can work through even evil rulers. He's done it throughout history. And speaking of insanity, aren't we the insane ones if we keep complaining about the lesser of two evils and then we keep voting for one of them? I mean, aren't we perpetuating the system endlessly? I mean, it seems like we're the insane ones, if we can't. But I mean, for me, I'll just say two things quickly. For me, when I saw that interview where he said he never asked God for forgiveness, I thought, wow, this man is just not well. This man either so suppresses his own guilt and shame and regret and sin that he's completely out of touch with, his creator. And that's kind of terrifying. But then the other thing is, if it was abortion, I mean, this is a guy who wants to fund Planned Parenthood and defended Planned Parenthood almost alone on a stage with 10 other people. I'm like...
And said they did good things.
Yeah. I mean, and he was in favor of partial birth abortion, I think only 10 years ago. I don't know how you could possibly know what partial birth abortion is and ever be in favor of it. And it just seems to me the guy, I mean, talk about pragmatic. He is the ultimate pragmatist. I've said before, I think the guy would have run as a Democrat if he thought that he could have beat Hillary in a primary. But It's a shame. But let me ask another question. This is maybe a short answer. I don't know. It's a phrase I use. It's a phrase I hear. But biblical worldview. It's kind of one of those things that we maybe say a lot, but maybe don't define a lot. When you say biblical worldview, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Because I think a lot of non-believers would hear a Christian say that and they go, "Oh, there they go, wanting to shove religion down my throat again. They want to go back to I don't know, King David, and if they even know who King David is, but a theocracy, Sharia law, just the Christian version of it." What does it mean for a Christian to have a biblical worldview and employ that in their public life?
Well, first off, everybody has a worldview. And that's an important statement to make. I've often said this phrase, there's no such thing as neutral. Everybody has a set of presuppositions that become like a set of lenses or glasses through which we interpret the world and by which we make decisions. Everybody has one, whether they know it or not. Now, a biblical worldview is that my lenses by which I interpret life, make decisions, understand what's going on around me in my world, is shaped through the Scriptures. And so a biblical worldview is, as I am looking, learning, interpreting, I base it through my understanding of an objective standard called the Bible. Now, other people's objective standard are themselves, or their learned professor, or some philosopher, or their parents. You understand? Everybody has a worldview that's been created. So when we talk about a biblical worldview, everybody, I understand what they say, they get nervous, but here's the point. Some worldview ultimately prevails in every civilization. Mm-hmm. The question is which one? Mm-hmm. Which one ultimately works? Which one has the fruit that we can lay out and make the case it's the best one for everybody? And I maintain that Christianity as a whole has the measurable fruit in life that says it is the best worldview by which to run a nation. Yeah. And people go, that's a theocracy. And I said, well, no. We're already under a theocracy. It's just you're the theos. I mean, you see, you worship yourself. You venerate yourself. So
that's a great way.
This whole business about theocracy is just that's just an epithet to get us to be shook up. Like, oh no, listen. Some worldview is going to win.
Right.
Some worldview prevails. Which one do we want it to be?
Right. And I've always thought it ironic. I think the Christian worldview ends up benefiting non-Christians, at a secular level as much as it does, the Christian. Now, in the eternal realm, no. I mean, not having a Christian worldview does hurt you. But, the thing about the Christian and the biblical worldview is that it is no respecter of persons. In other words, all people are made in the image of God and have inherent dignity. That seems that would benefit non-believers, secularists, atheists, whereas an atheistic worldview or a materialistic worldview, naturalistic worldview, secular worldview, whatever you want to call it, they don't have that view of man. They we're essentially descendant from bacteria, and we're all just animals, really. So, in what way do we see human beings valued and protected? Do we see the flourishing of life? So, I'm right there with you that look, the biblical worldview ends up producing wonderful fruit, and not to mention the fact that it's rooted in the one true revelation of the one true God. So I love that line. Yeah, we already live under a theocracy. It's just really who is your God? Because atheists believe in God too. They just maybe call them.
And all we have to do is take a tour around the world and let's just measure the fruit. I mean, you want to live under a secular humanism? Well, what happened to the old Soviet Union? Mm-hmm. I mean, let's just evaluate these things. Do you really want to go to Saudi Arabia? Do you want to go to Afghanistan? Let's just to India, to North Korea that bans all religion.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just take a tour around the world and ask ourselves the question. In fact, let's just ask this question. When Christianity goes somewhere, literacy rates go up. Orphanages are built, feeding stations, water wells, schools. I mean, show me around the world atheist feeding stations. Show me Show me Muslim soup kitchens.
Yeah.
Show me.
Yeah.
I mean, you see, this is the part that we need to be unabashedly fervent about, and that is Christianity in a biblical worldview is as valid a philosophy to come to the public table as any others, and I maintain it has a better track record.
Absolutely. No, I'm right there with you. Yeah, I saw there was an article that made the rounds on Facebook a while back. I think it's an article in the New Yorker, or it's a New York publication of some kind. Wouldn't be hard to Google and find, but it was something like the worst atrocity of the 20th century, and of course our mind goes to Hitler and Stalin, but it was, of course, China's always in the list as well, the Great Leap Forward, and there are new studies coming out about the Great Leap Forward. Of course, it's hard to count the millions of people that die if good censuses aren't kept and records and so forth. I mean, who's going to do the research, but they're putting that number at something like 45 million. 45 million people died in that great communist purge of the 50s and 60s, I think, of China. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and not counting Pol Pot. What is he? Cambodia or
right. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, I think, was another 2 or 3 million. I think. I mean, here's the intrinsic dignity and value of one human life, and we're talking about 2 or 3 million. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy the inhumanity to man that's taken place when the love of Christ is not present among a people. So, we both have an interest in I'm just going to say Bonhoeffer because my German's no good, but I know it'd be like Bonhoeffer or Bonhoeffer, something like that. But I have a ministry at our church we call the Bonhoeffer House, and we've got 8 people who live in intentional community, and they have dinner once a week together and do ministry together. They live in the old parsonage at our church, and you head up the Bonhoeffer Institute. Bonhoeffer is, I think we have to be careful when we come to Bonhoeffer because sometimes everybody wants to make him their hero. Theological liberals and communists even want to make him their hero. But, he is a guy who did live under peculiar political scenarios and situations, to put it mildly. I mean, he opposed Hitler when he became chancellor as early as 1933. That kind of famous radio speech that for some reason went off the air. And he eventually died in 1945 in Flossenburg in a concentration camp. He was there only for a couple of days. But he basically spent 12 years in various forms resisting the Reich, resisting the Reichskirche, the state church, working with the Confessing Church, helping to write the Barmen Declaration, helping to head up an illegal seminary for 5 years, to train pastors, reclaiming discipleship, all sorts of wonderful things. It's a big question, but if as someone who's a fan of Bonhoeffer or even a scholar of Bonhoeffer, I'm not a scholar. I always say I'm a fan, I'm not a scholar. Is there a way in which we could apply how he dealt with his political circumstances to how we should deal? Because I think where we want to go here in the last 10 minutes is, well, what do we do? I mean, if either one of these people are elected, and one of them is going to be, almost certainly, what do we do then,
Well, Bonhoeffer provides, I think, a template for leadership. He struggled. I would not tout myself as a scholar. I've read Metaxas' book carefully and am relying on many of his analyses and insight. But I think generally we can make the case that, Bonhoeffer, while trained in German liberalism, was highly affected by many of the black churches of America when he was here in America, and as he began to deal with what became evident in Hitler's evil, how the church was to respond to that, and he came to the place where he understood that the state was not over the church, but Christ was over the church, and our first allegiances were to Christ. And again, dying so early, we don't know where ultimately he would have landed. I think he was a man morphing along the way. Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to project our hopes upon him, not knowing the outcome. But he wrestled with civil disobedience. He wrestled with potential assassination. We don't know that he would have ultimately endorsed it. We know that it was a part of his thinking with regards to evil of that magnitude. So he was wrestling with these concepts of at what point is it appropriate for a Christian in the church to oppose civil leadership. And so he becomes, I think, the moniker, at least for me and what I'm doing, to look at pastors who I'm attempting to train and pull into the civil arena and say, listen, we've at least got to wrestle with this, and my hope is that we can engage it with a biblical worldview, because we know we have answers. We can't stand up and just preach we have the answer, and then when it comes to the civic arena, just say, well, no, not really, not here.
Right.
So I believe that we have an important role to play as clergy in this whole discussion, and I believe one of the reasons where we are is because we've lost the role of clergy to help bring leadership to it.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more there. I think clergy are afraid to speak out because they're always afraid of losing their tax-exempt status. And, I don't think there's ever been a single congregation in America that's lost its tax-exempt status, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it seems like one of those things we're always terrified of, but it's never happened. Not to say it couldn't happen, but basically there's only one thing that we have to avoid doing, as I understand it, which is to advocate for one candidate from the pulpit. We certainly have, you and I right now we're pastors right now as we speak, but we're not speaking from the pulpit. We still have rights as individuals to advocate or not advocate for a particular person. But I recently heard an article or an interview by a guy who wrote a book called The Benedict Option, and he's kind of advocated that, and I haven't read the book, and I don't know the story of the original Benedict very well, but the theory is that, the Benedictine rule was one of the most influential, writings in all of Western civilization, because it ended up giving rise to the monastic movement, which cultivated within small communities, holy living, obedience to God that ended up impacting society. And, when you think about Bonhoeffer, with the Finkenwalde years and then the seminary, the way it went on after that in various smaller places kind of spread throughout Germany, he seemed to have that same idea, although, in our case, Lutherans are not monastic, nor in yours, but we don't have that tradition exactly. But the idea is, we need to cultivate practices of discipleship. We need to be intentionally Christian, intentionally in Christian community, and we can bear fruit in the world, but only if we're intentional about it. And, that strikes me as something that we can be doing, that we don't have to have total despair on November 9th or 10th or whatever the day is. We can say, well, okay, church, what do we do? We can be an intentional community. We can provide support for one another. And I think we need to learn how to make our case. I look at how many quote unquote evangelicals have voted for Trump, and you have to wonder if, do they know what a biblical worldview is?
Yeah. Well, it did. This election has exposed the lack of discipleship, and it's exposed as much about the church as it has about our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And
now I will say this, because you had mentioned it. Now I'm probably a little bit edgier in this area than some, because I think a pastor may, by personal choice, choose not to advocate for a certain candidate. He just may feel like, I don't know that I want to do that, for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think a pastor should have the liberty to use any candidate he wants to use by name in order to illustrate and make the case of relevancy to his congregation. And here's the problem. The IRS cannot be the sermon content manager for the nation's pulpits.
Right.
They can't determine what's political, because anything at any time can be deemed political. Who would have thought homosexuality would have been deemed political?
Exactly.
30 years ago. We know abortion is dealt with through the Scripture, as well as civil leaders. So While I'm a little edgier, I have no problem naming names.
I hear you.
You know.
Yeah, I hear you. It wouldn't bother me as a parishioner, if my pastor did. Because generally speaking, I think these days, maybe not 30 or 40 years ago, but everything's changed since then. I mean, you're right. I mean, people, if I bring up abortion, not anymore, but previously in my congregation, I would bring up abortion and people say, well, that's a political issue. and I'm like, of course it's not a political, it's a political issue, of course, but it's first and foremost a moral issue. Then you might call it a social issue, and then it's a political issue. But these things used to not be political issues. They used to be comfortably ensconced in the moral, in the religious, in the social, discussions. But the thing is, our government has taken over so much of our society that everything is political. Bathrooms are political.
Exactly.
So it is going to be, I think, increasingly hard for a pastor and outspoken Christians who have a biblical worldview to not attach a name and a particular candidate to the biblical worldview, because the government has taken up so much of society that what choice do we have? I mean, we have to talk about people running for office. We can't only talk about it in the abstract. So anyway, I mean, I'm probably more maybe a little bit more careful, because I know that I've got liberal Democrats in my congregation, so I want them to hear the gospel as well. But I hope also, of course, never to compromise the holiness of God and the law of God and that sort of thing. But well, any kind of last thoughts here? We just have a minute or two left. Any kind of last thoughts on? Bottom line, what are Christians supposed to do? It doesn't seem like we have a good choice. A lot of our friends and family are telling us to vote for Trump. We don't want to violate our conscience. Are we doing more harm than good, like Grudem says, if we don't vote for Trump?
Well, I guess my last comment would be I don't believe so. I mean, I've been told that Trump is a Cyrus in waiting, or another biblical figure that God had used in order to raise up and help his people, and I've sort of kiddingly said, well, who's to say Hillary's not the Deborah in waiting? We can force anything to fit any outcome we hope will take place. The bottom line is this: that as Christians, we can't always predict the future. I don't have this clear word as to who God has determined who's going to be a leader. So all I have to do is then obey God. If I found the biblical template by which I'm to choose a leader, then is there, not just within the two-party box, but within, we can write in, there are America's Party and the Constitution Party, and there are other options out there. And I can obey God with a clear conscience and then go to bed at night and sleep and rest in his sovereignty.
Right.
And that's when sovereignty is not doing what I want to do, slapping Romans 8:28 on it and saying, well, God's going to work it out for his glory. Right. I mean, that's lawlessness.
Yeah.
It's presumption.
Right.
I need to obey God, and then I can rest. And so I'd simply encourage, whether it's a listener or whoever I come in contact with, I said, let's make it's just this simple. Obedience is simple. Disobedience is complicated.
Yep. Indeed.
So choose the simple way. Let's just obey God. Let's try it his way, and if enough of us do it, who's to say that God might not spare America and do something unusual?
There you go.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it. I think it's a question on the mind of a lot of evangelicals out there. Non-evangelicals might not care about it at all, but I think a lot of evangelicals are struggling with it. And I really like the way that you frame it. So Dr. Kevin Baird has been my guest. His website is drkevinbaird.com. No period after doctor, drkevinbaird.com. And you can learn more about the Bonhoeffer Institute there. You can read his response in full to Wayne Gruden's response. And Dr. Baird, or Pastor Baird, just stay on the line for just a minute. But I really want to thank you for coming on the show. And folks, I want to thank you for listening to the Sin Boldly Radio program here at KPFT, kpft.org. Check out KPFT to learn how to make a gift, become a member, and support what we do. And you might even call the station every now and then and say, hey, we like that Sin Boldly show Thursdays at 5 o'clock on the HD3 channel. Folks, I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm pastor at First Evangelical Lutheran Church. It's been my pleasure. And until next time, may you have the peace that passes all understanding. See ya.
can I offer you that didn't come from you? The blessings in your hand, everything